Hello, 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 and welcome once again to CorpusCast. As ever, I'm your host, Robbie Love. I'm a linguist at Aston University, and you're listening to the Aston Originals podcast, all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. As you know, in each episode, I interview researchers to find out about how corpus linguistics is informing the present and shaping the future of the study of language, with applications in education, health, technology, and many others. In today's episode, we're exploring an increasingly visible concern in modern life, which is the spread of misinformation or disinformation online, one type of which is so-called fake news. Efforts to combat the spread of fake news include educating the public to interpret information more critically, and better regulating platforms that are conducive for the spread of disinformation. But researchers, including one of my guests today, are developing methods to automatically detect fake news based on the language of the reporting in and of itself, linguistic analysis. And to talk about their research in this area, I'll be speaking with Maite Taboada, who is Distinguished SFU Professor at Simon Fraser University and Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. Maite is a computational linguist and discourse analyst with a wide range of research interests at the intersections between theory and application across the social sciences and engineering. And today, Maite will be discussing her work in fake news. And we'll also be joined by Dr. Katharina Ehret, affiliated as a researcher both with University of Freiburg and Simon Fraser University. And Katharina's work is rooted in quantitative variationist linguistics, focusing on language complexity, its variation, and its relationship to extra-linguistic pressures. Now, both Katharina and Maite have worked together on a project exploring the nature of the comments that readers leave on online news articles, and we'll be hearing about this research too. So to dive into the world of fake news and news discourse and online news comments, I'm very, very pleased to have with us both of our guests on the show today, Maite and Katharina. Welcome, both of you. It's a pleasure to have you here on CorpusCast.
Thank you, Robbie, and kudos to you and to the whole Aston team for getting this series going and making it so successful. It's incredibly useful and entertaining and informative about corpus linguistics. Thank you.
Oh well, thank you, and we couldn't do it without the generosity of our fantastic guests, now including both of you today. And welcome also, Katharina. It's great to have you here as well.
Yes, thank you very much for organizing this. I'm so pleased to meet you.
You too. And but you are both people that we've never met before face to face, and so it's really for me it's doing CorpusCast is a great opportunity to get to know researchers and hear about their really interesting work in a kind of personal way, but also we're separated by distance and sort of doing it virtually, so it's an interesting context. I'll start and you know as I sort of said, you are in this case both linguists. Sometimes when we have more than one guest, there might be one corpus linguist who's working with someone from another discipline, and so I might ask the corpus linguist the questions about corpus research. But in this case, you are both involved in this and related fields, and so we'll sort of have a go at kind of asking both of you these things. Maybe Maite, we could start with you. Broad question, I appreciate, but what does corpus linguistics mean to you?
Yeah, for me, corpus linguistics is a way of looking at language as a social or a social and contextual phenomenon. It doesn't matter the tool, the very specific theoretical framework that you have, how you think about language. What corpus linguists do is think of language as a system of communication that underlies everything that we say. And of course, to think of that system of communication, what we do is we look at language in context, and that allows for many interesting things. We can look at sort of very specific and fine-grained analyses of registers, or even linguistic constructions or lexical items. But we can also have this expansive view of language in different people across time. I think one of the most interesting and the most popular contributions of corpus linguistics is in historical research. So lots of potential point of entry, but for me, it's about thinking of language as a contextual and a social phenomenon.
And sort of, I suppose I'm always interested in at what point in one's education or career path do they, end up involved with this sort of specific area or specific set of tools, as you said. Was this something that you studied as an undergraduate, or did the kind of computational corpus linguistics part of your research come a little bit later on?
Yeah, for me, I grew up as a scholar. I'm from Madrid, and I did my undergraduate and PhD at the Universidad Complutense in Madrid. So that was a Haldeian environment. My department had a strong component of systemic functional linguistics, and although SFL is not necessarily corpus-based, it is always oriented to language use in context. So naturally, a lot of the research that I was reading and a lot of the findings were from corpus research. The computational part came later. I pursued a degree in computational linguistics in the United States, and there, of course, data and natural language data, large amounts of data is fundamental. And partly because I moved a lot, and I am in a more formal linguistics department in a sort of traditional North American linguistics department, I'm quite eclectic in approach, but I've always carried that, if you will, that a Haldeian aspect, also influenced by a lot of the British corpus linguistics, people like Susan Hanston, Tony McHenry, going to Joe Sinclair. And I think what joins those traditions is Firth, ultimately. The connection of SFL and corpus linguistics is through people like J.R. Firth and a lot of the linguistic structuralism. So that's all comes together for me.
Yeah, and you're right that in corpus-based critical discourse analysis, particularly, you do see a lot of corpus linguists drawing upon SFL frameworks as part of their, coding, qualitative coding of their examples, for instance. So I can see that one might lead you towards the other quite naturally, actually, because of that fit. Katharina, I want to sort of ask really the same to you in terms of your background and how you became interested in corpus linguistics and quantitative linguistic research.
Yeah, so I studied English language and literature at the Universities of Basel in Switzerland and the University of Freiburg in Germany. And really, I hold, an BA, MA, and my PhD degree from the University of Freiburg. So the University of Freiburg is, a stronghold of functional usage-based and corpus-based linguistics. So really early on in my studies, I got in touch with corpus methodologies. But it was actually only during my master's studies when I started working with Benedict Smerciani at the Freiburg Institute for Advanced Studies. This is an interdisciplinary research institute of the University of Freiburg. And that's when I got really interested in corpus linguistics and in linguistics in general. And that's also when I decided to stay in academia, really. So Benedict actually supervised all my theses, and I learned a lot about corpus-based research, quantitative and statistical methods from him. And it was actually also because of him that I first got interested in one of my major research interests, which is language complexity. And that's also, the topic that I'm currently working on in a, sociolinguistic typological perspective.
And we will get on to discussing how the two of you have worked together more recently. But first, I want to, focus on this, the main issue here to begin with, which is fake news. And Maite, this is one of seemingly a million different research interests of yours. When you read through your web pages, it's incredible just how many different sorts of things that you've worked on throughout your career, and I can't possibly kind of represent everything that you do, but certainly fake news has been a relatively recent interest of yours. And I guess to start with, it might be helpful to have a sense of what we're actually talking about here, because, when I first encountered the term fake news, it was actually from Donald Trump, using it as almost as like the equivalent of a slur, a pejorative sort of term that he would chuck at journalists. Basically, whenever they tried to criticize him or say something he didn't agree with, they'd accuse them of being fake news, which potentially undermines the kind of more practical definition of fake news as being, I guess, would you say information that is verifiably not true, as opposed to an opinion that someone might not agree with, which is clearly not the same thing. So when we talk about fake news in real terms, what are we actually referring to?
Yeah, you're right that it's often used as a barb, and it's interesting how it's become part of our everyday lexicon. And if you say to me, "You were late," I could say, for this recorded, I could say, "No, that's fake news." Before I could have said he's lying or something else. So, but I'll give you a bit more context also of how this all comes together, at least in my mind. Our lab, the discourse processing lab, we've been working for quite a few years now on news in general, and that includes a lot of different things. We've done research on gender representation in the news, how many times men and women are quoted, for instance. And we're also interested in the use of evaluative language in news, which ties to a lot of my research interests in subjectivity, evaluation, sentiment analysis. And that led to some of the project that Katharina and I did together in looking at complexity and subjectivity in news stories, and also on the comments posted in response to news stories, which are very subjective. And that has started another strand of research on toxic and abusive language. But in the context of fake news, what we realized is that there are news stories that are intentionally fake, as you say. It's not just an accusation or something you don't like. So what we're talking about technically is called misinformation and disinformation. Disinformation would be just, something that is not quite true, but, you don't know about the intention of the person who said it or who wrote it. And misinformation is false information with the intention to deceive. So it's a very sort of well-defined problem when somebody has written an article with the intention to deceive. And that's how we define it. And the hypothesis there is that we can find in the language, in the style of that language, clues that will tell us that is false, that is not fact-based.
Okay, so it's the intention behind that is crucial in sort of these distinctions that we're drawing between these kinds of false news. Was funnily enough, was sort of the British media were trying to kind of make that a thing. I think at the same time that Trump started saying fake news, but it didn't catch on. The sort of British false news and sort of it didn't really last very long. But yes, it's I suppose that the hypothesis that you mentioned that leads me to my next question, which is detecting fake news, intentionally, deceitful information through linguistic analysis. This is something that you tell me more about. Kind of it's the assumption that going into this is like, yes, there are demonstrable and reliable kind of patterns that will very reliably sort of show us, this is an intentionally deceptive text as opposed to something that's not.
Yeah, so a whole range of patterns, and here we're drawing on authorship attribution, for instance. We're drawing on stylometrics, what kind of style is being used here, but also on the assumption that a lot of the people who do this are amateurs. So they are imitating the style of reporters. And sort of thinking of that whole range of ideas, then we can perhaps find clues. And this was a corpus-based study. So we started with just data and looking at the data and news stories that somebody else, not us, because we're not experts on what's fact or not. So this is fact-checking websites had said this news story is false and this news story is true, fact-based, if you will. So comparing the language in those using corpus linguistics methods and natural language processing methods. And we did find some patterns, general patterns. I don't know if they can be reliably used, but they can at least be used as flags, perhaps warning signals to an audience. So we find that fake news tends to use more negative language, a lot of intensification, rhetorical questions that have no answer, or where the answer is presupposed of the reader. A lot of the language of othering, things like these people, they, right? So that us versus them distinction. And the other interesting thing is that there is a mix of formal and informal language, perhaps because it's amateurs, because it's not reporters we know, and there's lots of corpus linguistics research that has shown that current news language in English is very informal. It tends more to a conversational style, and this has been a historical process where we go towards more informal. Contractions are very frequently used in news stories and in mainstream media. And we found that sometimes the people who write fake news stories don't use contractions. Because I'm supposed to be formal.
Yes.
So there's some clues that, like I said, they can be used as flags.
So in terms of the practicalities of the data that you're using in this sort of research, identifying it, gathering it, and also to get a sense of what we're talking about here, the reality of it. When you said that these are amateurs, that we're not talking about mainstream media, right? Where I guess we can talk about bias, and we can talk about heavily, in some cases, bias reporting, which is distinguished from something that's you might have something that's strongly evaluated but still true, as opposed to something that's patently just completely made up lie. There's been a lot of discussion in the press, funny enough, about the threat of fake news for democracy, and there's all sorts of accusations have been flung around in recent years about fake news influencing national election results and things like that. Where does it come from? And maybe the point is we don't know, and that's part of the problem. But like we're talking about, I'm almost imagining just somebody sat on their laptop somewhere, just typing something. But or is it more of a kind of structured kind of, or like underground network? What are we actually kind of dealing with here? If it's just a bunch of individual people, maybe they are enough to cause chaos, right? But it's the way that it's discussed, at least, and this is purely my own, curiosity about it. The way it's discussed, it sounds as if it's something so much more orchestrated, I guess, something on a much sort of more industrial scale, right?
Yeah, so there's so many components to this, right? There's, as you say, the sort of mainstream media and their own bias, and some of that is sort of put in check a little bit because they follow journalistic standards of not printing lies or printing in quotes, printing or publishing on a website. There is propaganda that is clearly written with a spin, but we've taken a little portion of that whole spectrum, in part because sometimes to do research you have to say, I'm going to take this little slice and work on it.
Yeah.
And the slice that we're working on is people who sit down and write something that is completely untrue. And within that slice of the fake news pie, there's lots of different people. There are well-known cases, especially in sort of the late 2010s, 2015, 16, 17, cases of teenagers who figured out that if they wrote stories about politics, they could place a lot of ads on them, because they would generate a lot of clicks and therefore a lot of revenue. So this is kind of the amateur fake news creator. Then we went on to conspiracy theories, and people who create conspiracy theories either because it benefits them or because they actually believe in some of those things. So it's just really hard as a linguist to get at the source of the fake news problem. It is, it's got many facets. The reason we are talking about it so much is not because there is a lot more individual fake news stories. It's because they circulate so easily. Creating false information is not a new phenomenon. What's new is how easy it is to distribute it in social media channels. And there are lots of studies that a handful of rumors can reach millions of people very easily. So that's why it's sort of a more difficult problem to solve, and that's why a lot of the efforts are at detecting at the source. So the time that first story is published or that first tweet that contains a headline is published, stopping it there before it reaches millions of people.
So what would you say is the kind of current kind of state of the art in that endeavor of, trying to automatically detect it at source, as you said? What's the kind of situation now in terms of how reliably it's possible to take an individual text and what do we come out with a score, like a likelihood of this is more or less, like is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, a lot of the effort is saying this just got posted, it's likely fake,
Right.
And then this also depends on terms of service and regulations and regulatory frameworks under which whoever the hosting company operates. But you can also take different approaches. There's also, of course, the danger of censorship, of silencing somebody who's got an opinion, and opinions are absolutely valid. So some of the approaches include slowing down content that seems to be becoming viral very fast. And that's not necessarily censoring, but just slowing down until we got a chance to check it. The situation has changed dramatically in the last few months because there's a lot of fragmentation in social media now. For instance, a lot of this is often called safety and integrity teams in social media companies. So the team at Twitter that used to do this has been, I think, disintegrated. Everybody has left or has been laid off. And then there's a lot of movement in that space with Meta producing a new kind of Twitter kind of
Threads.
Threads, exactly.
Interesting name.
It's so many interesting metaphors there as well about how we thread ideas.
Yeah.
Linguistic metaphors,
Yeah.
but it's just a huge problem with many prongs, and that I think needs a lot of research and a lot of scholars to pay attention. Social science scholars, journalism, media studies. We're all working on little pieces of it. I think, and then you said the danger. I think the danger is the loss of trust in institutions and in sources of information. That is the real danger to democracy and public participation. That we just don't trust what we read anymore, or we don't trust what people tell us.
We're going to, in a moment, move on to talk about how people respond to news articles, not necessarily fake news articles, but more broadly, the work we mentioned at the beginning with you and Katharina. But I do want to ask you, before we move on to that, as an academic, you're publishing research and you're sharing with the academic community and beyond, the findings of your work and the methods you're developing and tools and corpus data. We're about to talk about a corpus that you recently compiled and published on the opinion and news comments, that sort of data. How do you perceive a risk of almost inadvertently publishing like recipe book of here's how to write really good fake tweets that are fake news articles that are really hard to detect, because here's conversely a list of all of the things that make it obvious, right? How do you sort of tread the line between sharing your research, which is obviously something we're all compelled to do as part of this kind of work, and not sharing so much that you make the task harder by the wrong people learning from you about how to do it better,
Yeah, it's a serious concern. Also we try to identify abuse and toxicity online. So the concern is that people will just figure out ways of getting around our automatic detectors. Basically, this is an arms race. We find indicators, and then sort of the baddies figure that out, and then they find ways of getting around it. So it is a concern, but ultimately, I believe in open science, and I believe in publishing research results. I don't think it's the cost-benefit analysis of withholding research for fear that some baddie may find it is not right. I think it's more important to inform the research community, to have other people build on what we do, and as much as we are contributing to solving the problem. Sometimes I think the chances that somebody who's creating fake news will read our papers are very small. So I think it's better to further research and to keep talking to each other about these problems.
Yes, I mean, I'm grateful if any other academic reads my papers, let alone people outside of academia. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure that's true. We're going to move on now, Katharina. I thank you for patiently waiting and observing the conversation thus far. I do want to bring you in now to move on to the work that you have both been doing together, looking at the comments on online news articles. I suppose that the first question I have is really about how did this collaboration come about in the first place?
Yeah, thank you. So this was after my PhD that I and Maite wanted to work on subjectivity, which is one of her areas of expertise, and on language complexity, which already was one of my major research interests. And we applied and received funding by the prestigious Alexander von Humboldt Foundation for me to come over to the Fraser University, and that's how we first started working together. And back then, Maite and her team at the Discourse Processing Lab had just been compiling the SFU opinion and comments corpus. And a lot of people, including journalists, including linguists from various fields, but also other researchers, spoke and wrote about online comments, online news comments as conversations. So there was this assumption that online news comments are, because of their, turn-taking and dialogic nature, somehow like face-to-face spoken conversation. And we wanted to find out whether that was actually true, so whether they really were like face-to-face conversation or not.
And would you sort of would you characterize, I suppose, online news comments, to what extent are they conversations as opposed to an individual person saying one thing and then disappearing off again, right? Is that part of the consideration as well as the actual linguistic sort of features?
So our focus was really on the structural linguistic properties of online news comments. So we were interested in which type of language is used in these comments, how people use grammatical constructions and which ones and which features people basically use in online news comments. So our focus was not on the interactional dynamics of online news comments, but really on their lexicogrammatical properties. And back then, this was also largely uncharted territory. And we were the first to use a large corpus to analyze the grammatical structure of online news comments.
So to what extent did you find, the speech-like features as opposed to stuff that you wouldn't normally expect to see in transcripts of speech?
So what we found, I don't know whether that's very surprising or not. I don't believe it's really surprising. We found that online news comments are not like spontaneous conversation, despite this dialogic appearance. Rather, they are to be placed clearly on the written pole of the spoken written continuum. So they are clearly written register. And they are characterized by a distinct combination of features, so which makes them their own register, basically. So they are informally written, but also to some extent involved, and they are above all argumentative and evaluative, and a little bit informational as well. So in spoken spontaneous conversation, you would expect, or you typically find a lot of first and second person pronouns. You find a lot of hedges, emphatics, contractions, that deletion, all type of features that are typical of online processing and spontaneous production.
Yeah.
And in online news comment, you do find some of these involved features, but not that many. So they are clearly written. I mean, people have time to edit their posts before actually, hitting the enter button and posting them.
Yeah. So the we're somewhere in the space between or neither speech and writing, right?
Well, that's actually we argue in our papers, and I strongly believe that online communication should not be characterized as something in between, or we should not try to measure it up always according to how close it is to traditional spoken and written registers. Rather, I believe that we should see them as their own mode of communication. So, and they're a third mode of communication in addition to a traditional spoken and written communication.
And maybe if you can say more about the data you mentioned before, the SFU opinion and comments corpus that Maite and colleagues compiled, and something that you see in a lot of online news articles which have comment sections is not only you have the comments, but they are kind of ranked in a way based on users voting, up or down on whether they like or dislike or agree or disagree with the comments. And, I'm certainly familiar with some research that has taken that into account in interpreting the analysis? If you have a strongly right-wing news publication, then the comments that are getting lots of upvotes are going to probably be the ones that share those views, and the ones with lots of downvotes are probably going to be the more sort of left-wing liberal people kind of saying, that they think what they've read is a load of rubbish or whatever. So, is that sort of information also present in the data, and can that help you in sort of interpreting, especially you mentioned, the evaluative side of this, and yes, I'm sure it is highly evaluative. Does it help with this kind of research?
Well, first, let me say a couple of words about the corpus as such. So, corpus counts like roughly 44 million words in total, which is really large, and it's the largest available corpus of online news comments and opinion articles. The corpus, we've used the commons thread corpus. So this is the corpus that preserves the thread structure, the conversation-like thread structure of the online comments. But we did not look at upvotes or downvotes. So we really worked with the text and analyzed these grammatical features and their functions, their discourse functions, as well as the situational context in which online news comments were produced. Yes, but the corpus does have some extra annotation. Maybe Maite would like to say something about that.
Yeah, so in the spirit of open science, we made the corpus widely available with all the metadata, including upvotes, thread structure, date of posting. Sometimes it's interesting how the first comments sort of set the tone for the conversation, and like you say, the tone depends on the the direction of the paper. This is from one newspaper, the Global Mail. It's the main English language daily in Canada, but it would be an interesting comparison with other papers. There's lots of other potentially interesting studies. We did a study on the civility of the comments, how constructive they are, and what are the characteristics of a good, so if you want, a good civil comment. But there's lots of other things that can be studied. As Katharina said, this work, or most of the work we've done, is on what are they? What is this register? We think we found a new register in the wild, a register of online news comments. They don't look like anything else, using multidimensional analysis and placing them on this sort of multidimensional spaces of registers. There's something else. But I'd love it if other people looked at the comments and did other studies. I know that there's some work being done as well in toxicity.
Is there a pre-online equivalent, right, in terms of this as you define, sort of a new genre, a new register? What is the closest equivalent to online news comments before news was shared online? I mean, are we talking sort of letters to the editor kind of interactions? Whereas there isn't really an equivalent other than maybe people arguing in the pub about what's happening in the news or something. Is there anything sort of, or is this really kind of a relatively new thing that has facilitated a kind of discourse that simply didn't exist before?
Yeah, so yes and no. So letters to the editor are probably the closest that traditional communication comes to online news comments. But online news comments, really, I mean, we've compared them to a whole range of traditional spoken and written registers, as well as to online written registers. And what we have found, interestingly, is that compared to traditional written registers, they come closest to argumentative essays. So they share these argumentative features with argumentative essays, such as linking adverbs, however, ways of making an argument. I suggest that, things like this. And also to social letters because of their subjective, evaluative nature. And then in terms of written online registers, they are or come closest to reviews and opinion blogs on the one hand, but on the other hand, to research articles. And this really nicely illustrates how online news comments combine these evaluative involved features with informational argumentative features. And yeah, honestly, we haven't found anything that is like really, really close to online news comments. So they really have their own way of using language.
That's really interesting, and maybe helps anecdotally explain some very occasionally over the last few years, bits of research that I've been involved with have been reported in the news, and I've made the mistake of reading the online comments on those articles, and they're saying, who is this Dr. Love guy? Who does he think he is, telling us how language is changing or whatever? And it did feel like this is so unusually personal in the sense of strangers kind of having this platform to talk about you who you've never even met, and you'll never meet, mostly in many ways anonymous in many cases as well, and you're right that there is something unique about it, which is really interesting. I want to ask, and maybe this is something both of you have an opinion on, the extent to which comments may be involved with going back to the issue of fake news. I've seen a few times when, especially like on Facebook, when an ad for something might appear, or you may end up on a website that's sort of trying to sell something from an ad, like clothing or whatever, and it might often I see it where they've kind of embedded the sort of Facebook post into the website, and it shows a comment string, and it has a box. It looks like you can type in your own feedback to the seller or whatever, but you read the comments and you kind of go, these don't look real. These are just it's fake. The comments themselves are fake, and that's in the case of somebody trying to sell something, I guess. But is there a threat, or is it already happening that that you may see as part of trying to increase the authenticity of a fake article, fake comments, and other strategies, other textual strategies, kind of combining to try and make it seem more realistic?
Yeah, there's this pretty common bots being deployed to post the same comment across different platforms. There's also the phenomenon of review spam. So review products either very positively or negatively, depending on what your economic interest is. So for instance, TripAdvisor has been very concerned about this. Hotels giving themselves very good reviews. Or Amazon as well has a whole team dedicated to trying to find fabricated content to promote or downvote content. Yeah, it's technically called the enshittification of the internet. And there's a book by Cory Doctorow that uses that term. There's just a lot of content that is just completely useless at best and harmful at worst. There's a lot of that online.
Yeah. And would you, as we start to wrap up here, the conversations that I've had recently on other episodes as well have increasingly, it seems, turned to AI and, these generative chatbot models like ChatGPT and Google Bard and things like that, with the comments, but also, of course, more broadly with fake news. Are we moving away from these individual people, manually authoring? Maybe they never were doing it fully manually in the first place, to sort of using almost ironically the same technology or the same type of technology that's being used to detect it to generate it in the first place. Is that part of this kind of arms race that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I see that. I've seen experimental linguists, like psycholinguists, for instance, who use online platforms to get subjects. Platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk.
Yeah.
And they are finding more and more than when they used to have authentic answers from humans, and now they have generated text. So this is going to affect research as well.
Oh, I see. So people get paid to participate in that sort of stuff, and so they're just making a quick buck by pasting in any old thing, right?
Yeah. So it's
pretty
common if you have like some linguistic judgments. Does this, good? What does this pronoun refer to? It used to be very common to recruit subjects online, and especially during pandemic. It was a very good way to continue psycholinguistic experiments. And now what people are finding is that these are just ChatGPT generated. I know.
Wow. It's a rapidly changing landscape, I think.
It is.
We'll draw things to a close by there's so I'm really having to sort of hold my tongue here, stop myself asking more and more. Really, it's so fascinating and so rapidly changing as well. That certainly get the impression from both of you. I do have my 3 quick questions that I ask at the end. I won't ask you both to answer all 3, just for the sake of time. But Katharina, if you don't mind, I will start with my first question for you, which is research in corpus linguistics living up to its potential?
Well, yes, I think the method definitely is. But naturally, corpus linguistics also has its limitations, such as it cannot provide any negative evidence. And regarding the availability of corpora, which is for me the prerequisite for doing corpus linguistics, my answer is mixed. So there are plenty of corpora for English, but for smaller languages, data is still rare. And also corpora with sociolinguistic information is sadly rarely available publicly. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, there's certainly things that will continue to develop and improve. And in the last episode, actually, we spoke with a developer of Sketch Engine, which is one of these widely used corpus tools. And they're now up to over 100 languages that are represented with corpora, publicly available corpora on this. So there are some movements in the direction of increasing the sort of multilingual diversity there. Maite, if you are happy to take my second question, this might be a quick answer actually as well. What is your number one piece of advice for students who are new to corpus linguistics? For you, I'll extend it to computational linguistics too.
Well, you make the answer very easy. I would say learn some programming, whatever it is. Katharina works with R. I mostly use Python. It doesn't matter, but the idea is be able to understand it enough to use widely available tools. But I also do the caveat of learn about language too. So there's the danger of just staying at the tool level, what the tool is able to give you, without having a broader view of what language is and how people use it.
Thank you. Yes, that's come up a few times now. Learn to code from day one, essentially. Something I wish I'd taken advice on that about 10 to 15 years ago. Would have made things a lot easier now. Finally, and I will turn back to Katharina and Maite. You feel free to chip in if you also have an opinion on this too. What will corpus research look like in 50 years from now?
Okay. Well, I think overall corpus linguistics will increasingly draw on data from the web, and working with very big, large data harvested from the web will become the standard rather than the exception. That's what I think. Also, I think that as we are working increasingly with language from the web, the data will become more multimodal. So on top of text, it will include video and images as well.
Maite, do you have anything else you'd add to that, or would you have a similar perspective?
Yeah, lots of potential directions. I think one positive thing of the advent of generative AI is that it has made corpus linguistics very popular. People are learning about it. You cannot go to an AI or NLP conference these days without hearing Firth quoted at least once. You shall know word by the company it keeps.
Yes.
So I look forward to seeing how all these fields cross-pollinate.
Indeed, yes. And on that note, we will draw things to a close. And I'm, as I said, really stopping myself from asking more to both of you, because this is so fascinating. But thanks both of you for coming on. It's been really great to be able to have a chat with you, and of course thanks to you, listeners and viewers, however you're consuming CorpusCast, for tuning into this episode. In the next episode, I'll be speaking to a colleague of Maite's who now works at the University of Birmingham, Professor Jack Reed, about computational sociolinguistics. In the meantime, do let us know your thoughts about CorpusCast using the hashtag CorpusCast, and make sure to check out the Aston Corpus Linguistics Research Group on Twitter at Aston Corpus, and you can find me at Lovermob. CorpusCast is an Aston Originals podcast hosted by me, Robbie Love, and produced by Sam Cook. And with all of that said, thank you again to Maite and Katharina for coming on. It's been great to speak with you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much.